This salvage auction outside Vegas sat on a dirt lot way out at the edge of the desert, where the neon glitz dies off, leaving nothing but pale, flat dirt stretching out in every single direction. On a Thursday morning in late July, with the sun already baking the lot by 7 a.m., 140 wrecked vehicles covered 3 acres of cracked concrete. Some burned, others destroyed by floodwater. Others mangled into twisted shapes that made it nearly impossible to guess what they once were. We know this wasn't a place for hope. It drew practical buyers picking over the bones. They didn't see real opportunity, they only saw cheap scrap metal. And for guys who just wanted replacement parts cheap enough to justify the long drive. Mason Reed pulled up with his daughter Ava. His truck had 180,000 miles on it, but he didn't mind. He was 40 years old. Built lean, the kind of wiry muscle a guy builds by wrestling with cars in a cramped garage day after day. His forearms were scarred and tough, proof of a life spent digging into engine bays and forcing rusted bolts to finally turn. He wore a faded gray shirt washed 100 times over. Work boots resoled at least once, and honestly nothing else worth mentioning. He stood among the assembled car dealers and the slick buyers in their expensive clothes. Mason stood there looking like he just dropped in from an entirely different planet, which honestly wasn't far off. Ava was 8. She already knew the drill at these auto auctions: stick close to her dad, stay quiet, and just watch. She had big dark eyes that moved, slowly soaking in every detail. She had a calm patience you rarely see in kids that she'd naturally picked up over years of essentially growing up right there inside a working mechanic's shop. The morning auction burned through those early lots with the brisk, cold indifference of a system where nobody gave a damn about the junk cars being hawked. Ruined pickup trucks, a couple of sport bikes with badly bent frames, a smashed delivery van rear-ended so hard the whole back end caved in by at least 2 solid feet. The wealthy buyers dismissed them all with cold, professional calm. Then, a heavy flatbed rolled through the gates. Stick with me here. The wreckage on back was once a Ferrari, color completely gone. A massive fire had baked it, scorching the paint to pure carbon and dulling the shiny chrome into a dead, flat gray. The passenger side held its basic shape, but the fire had totally gutted every single interior piece. The driver's side had taken a hit, nothing fatal but definitely enough to crush the door and warp the entire roof. The windows were totally shattered and gone. The seat was just a charred frame. The dash was just melted plastic, deformed and rehardened into an ugly blob. The heat had destroyed any original shape. Eric Vaughn dealt luxury cars down by the Vegas Strip. His flashy designer clothes made sure everyone knew he had money. He stared right at the ruin. From his spot at the front, he just scoffed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound, the noise a man makes seeing garbage. That's a parts car at best, he sneered at the guy beside him, and not many of those parts are worth pulling. The auctioneer called out the damaged status with cold efficiency. He'd hawked junk his whole life and certainly didn't care about a car's lost soul. No title, missing paperwork, sold strictly as is. The blind crowd wrote it off as scrap before he even finished speaking. But Mason wasn't staring at that ruined body. You know what he saw? Through that crushed hood, he was studying potential inside the engine bay. The hood was wedged open, pried apart by the flames or some passing cynic who took one look and walked away. But his eyes scanned that charred metal the way a true believer reads sacred text. No rushing, no sudden excitement, just the steady focus. The quiet attention of a man practiced at finding what others missed. Something survived deep in that subframe, a hidden layout. Mount points that simply did not exist on any standard Ferrari, sitting under those bright dealership lights. He froze right there. His daughter Ava glanced up, sensing the shift. He stayed completely silent. The auctioneer asked for $200. The blind crowd froze, dropping to $150. $800, Mason called. The auctioneer blinked, showing the faint shock of a guy who had seen it all. Not one soul countered. You and I know that heavy silence. The bystanders just stared at Mason, flashing looks of pity and smug amusement. A guy named Eric sneered loudly. You just bought a recycling project. But Mason just counted out his last cash from a faded envelope in his pocket. Then he calmly hired a flatbed to haul his prize out to his garage in Henderson. Little Ava scrambled back up into their worn truck unfazed. Leaving that lot of doubters behind, she turned to study her dad. It still has its bones, she said. He caught her eye. Yeah, he agreed, it does. His shop sat on a cheap month-to-month rental lot, a shaky setup that was only getting closer to the edge. It was just a brutalist concrete shell holding 4 heavy lifts. Barely 2 of those lifts still functioned properly. Another sat useless for 6 months, waiting on a hydraulic part they just couldn't afford yet. The cramped back office offered nothing but a sputtering coffee pot, a cheap fold-out cot and a desk buried under intricate schematics, and shelves stacked with manuals, the priceless library of a genius who spent 20 hard years mastering his craft. The heavy flatbed rolled up at 4 in the afternoon. Mason helped lower that scorched supercar onto the raw concrete, and the driver sped off. Mason paced around the wreckage, observing. Grabbed a flashlight to seek out the secrets you and I could never spot just standing there. Little Ava plopped cross-legged near the workbench, diving into a dusty library book she brought along. She had played this exact quiet role since she was barely old enough to sit upright alone, tagging along to the dusty shop and simply occupying her time in her own little world while he chased his visions. She naturally knew this chaotic shop was a sacred zone for deep, unbroken concentration. And she knew when greatness was working, you just leave it entirely alone. His faith paid off just 20 minutes into the hunt. A hidden chassis stamp carved into a spot no ordinary factory Ferrari would ever dare feature. Not a mistake in the metal, but a deliberate extra clue. Right alongside the mundane identification tag. Someone stamped a hidden code that Mason knew instantly, because he used it himself. Decades ago, inside a legendary Maranello workshop that doesn't even use that name today. He rocked back on his heels. That stamp proved this was a Ferrari Nero. A secret 3-year project born inside their deepest labs, leaving behind only one lone prototype. A true ghost car, left nameless because the world was never allowed to see it. A ghost that never raced. Most assumed this prototype was entirely too advanced for any engineering team to support, and, officially, they scrapped the supercar after a Turin test crash shattered it beyond what their strict program budget could ever hope to fix. Or so the official paperwork claimed. Mason was one of only 7 engineers working that visionary program. He served as the lead mind behind its powertrain integration. He understood this machine the way true creators know things they have. Spent 3 years shaping from raw concepts and half-finished blueprints and late-night shouting matches over whether a specific design fix would actually survive the brutal track conditions it had to endure. His connection to the vehicle was never just sentimental. It was something close to deeply personal. They forced him out right after the crash, and that dismissal was anything but gentle. He retreated to the States, built a Nevada repair shop from scratch, and buried the Ferrari Nero secret for 7 long years. Now he stared at the burned-out wreckage, sitting on his shop floor. His eyes traced the hidden secondary stamp. He studied the charred mount points from the salvage auction, seeing the brilliant truth underneath. He walked to the office, poured black coffee, and sat in dead silence for hours. Where others saw junk, he stepped out and worked. True vision means uncovering what survives before the actual classic car restoration begins. Mason spent 3 full days doing nothing but capturing proof through photographs, taking precise measurements, filling a numbered notebook with every tiny detail of the wreckage. You and I might rush, but he had to know exactly what survived before altering a single thing. The ruined machine had suffered through a devastating fire, a brutal impact, heavy weather exposure, and then a careless secondary stint decaying inside some forgotten storage lot before finally hitting the salvage auction block. Each disaster left overlapping scars. To a blind eye it was trash, to him it required careful reading. The painstaking documentation revealed one undeniable truth: the flames had been absolutely savage. Yet incredibly, the core structural bones survived intact. The rare tubular space frame, a radical departure from typical Ferrari builds and the project's signature, held completely strong. Warped in spots with stress fractures across 2 bars, sure but unbroken. The exotic body panels were vaporized or hopelessly ruined. The cabin was completely ash. Surface engine parts were utterly melted, but under a careful borescope, the mighty block showed the exact hidden promise a true believer looks for. Against all logical odds, the supercar rebuild candidate was in shockingly salvageable condition. He told little Ava on their 5th evening. sitting quietly at the cramped kitchen table inside their rented house, just down the street. "Let's look closer." He explained the auctioneers were entirely blind to what it actually was. He kept a few impossible secrets hidden. He admitted wreck was incredibly rare. He promised to try bringing it back to life, warning her the project would drain the precious little time and money they barely had. Ava absorbed his words with the heavy, focused gravity she saved for crucial moments. She was only 8 years old. Yet she carried her father's unshakable faith and her mother's sharp precision. That rare blend meant, when this little girl finally chose to speak, you absolutely stopped to listen. "Is it like the shiny ones in your book?" she asked. She pointed toward the heavy Ferrari racing encyclopedia resting proudly above their tired coffee maker. "Different from those," he said. "More than those." We know he was right. "Then it deserves salvation. You and I know faith never ignores the harsh financial reality." The cost was just another heavy truth he carried alongside everything else. A flashing warning light of risk that a man with purpose simply couldn't ignore. Mason's tiny garage margins left absolutely zero room for blind, foolish gambles. 3 steady accounts anchored him, an apartment complex that brought in 2 reliable vehicles, a small, struggling transport company relying on 1 aging van, plus everyday folks dragging in their ordinary mechanical breakdowns, blind to the miracle nearby. They trusted him because he beat dealership prices and delivered rock-solid, honest work. This humble grind built his foundation, paying rent and keeping his daughter Ava's medicine stocked. That was a father's sacred order of priority, guarded fiercely and never once compromised. The medicine protected a fragile, lingering condition deep inside her heart. A structural flaw found at age 4, a hidden defect that others pitied but he managed ever since with pills that held the fear at bay alongside a recommendation whispered at every single yearly checkup, wrapped in the same careful doctor speak, claiming that expensive surgery remained her only true salvation. The price tag was a towering mountain, always sugar-coated by doctors pitching hopeful payment plans to soften the blow. But he saw clearly. He knew that level of wealth simply did not exist in his current dirt-stained reality. He kept a hidden folder at home, heavy with daunting medical documents. He ignored the folder most days. The massive stakes were already burned into his mind. This burnt supercar became his quiet sanctuary, revived in the dark, stolen hours of early morning. It meant late nights after Ava slept, and fighting for every rare Saturday his grueling shop schedule allowed. "Stick with me here. Believers don't rush miracles." He worked with unyielding, methodical precision. He started with the charred frame. Everything else relied completely on rebuilding that core foundation. Armed with a heavy welding rig and custom jigs he'd patiently crafted by hand over many grueling years, giving him the absolute precision required to resurrect this shattered supercar frame. Deep stress fractures meant violently cutting out the dead, failing steel to graft in fresh, unyielding material. It wasn't pretty or elegant, but it was rock-solid salvation. He bought the heavy steel from a Phoenix supplier who lacked the vision to ask why. Amidst this revival, Ava developed a quiet, faithful routine of her own. She appeared in the dusty garage after school, whenever her fragile heart found the strength, which thankfully was most days. She tackled homework on a distant workbench, staying clear of the flying sparks where her father resurrected the wreck. And once her homework was finished, she watched. From endless hours of watching, she absorbed the beautiful, unspoken grammar of his craft. She knew the quiet reverence of inspection versus the brutal force of active rebuilding. She recognized that intense, visionary gaze he got when hunting for a miraculous, unseen solution. She felt the exact shift in his posture the second that brilliant breakthrough finally struck. Over the past 2 months, she'd become his tiny assistant, offering water or shifting a fallen flashlight when shadows threatened to hide his glorious progress. Once, as if reading his mind, she handed him the exact wrench he desperately needed. She helped quietly, never demanding praise. It was the perfect instinct for a shared miracle. Deep into the 3rd exhausting week, little Ava finally crashed on the cramped office cot. Mason gently draped his heavy jacket over her small shoulders, cracking the door so a warm, protective glow from the shop reached her without the harsh overhead glare. By 2 a.m. we could see the impossible dream breathing, frame solid, the glorious bodywork preparation finally underway. "Let's look at this together." He stepped back, studying it. To ordinary eyes, it looked completely hopeless. People just saw a ruined framework, a burned-out shell stripped down to its barest bones. But there is deep honesty in scrap, a truth revealed only when the flashy exterior burns away. But where they saw failure, Mason saw the coming masterpiece. He possessed that rare faith to see the hidden potential. He could hold the gleaming finished supercar rebuild in his mind, entirely ignoring the charred, broken reality. That unyielding vision is exactly what earned him a spot on the elite Nero supercar program. The rare gift to study scrap metal or broken parts and see the glorious road ahead. A sound at the office door made him glance over. His daughter Ava stood there in her socks, wearing his oversized jacket, squinting against the harsh bulbs. "I fell asleep," she mumbled. "I know." She stared at the ruined chassis, staying perfectly quiet. "It looks like a skeleton, right now it is." She thought about that. "Skeletons aren't sad," she whispered. "They're just waiting." Mason looked closely at his young daughter. He turned his eyes back to the frame. "Yeah," he agreed, "that's right." The visitor who showed up on a Tuesday morning in week 5 was 71 years old, with shock white hair and the calloused hands of a man who practically lived inside engine bays. He parked a simple rental out at the curb, stepping right into the dusty garage workspace. He moved with the quiet confidence of a believer who knows exactly where he is going, completely unbothered about invitations. His name was Luca Moretti. He was the top materials engineer on the legendary Ferrari Nero project. In reality, he was the guy who officially greenlit Mason's bold powertrain integration strategy. And he fiercely defended that vision in closed-door meetings whenever the corporate doubters attacked it. When the program suddenly died, he kept totally quiet publicly. But that deep silence had personally cost him something he never shared with a single soul. Mason glanced up from the restoration work and froze completely. Luca stared at the ruined salvage car for a long time, his face gave nothing away. Finally, he spoke in Italian. "I heard a rumor." "How did you hear it?" Mason asked. His Italian still worked perfectly fine after years of deep rust, carrying that very specific rhythm of a man who learned the trade words instead of growing up with them. From a guy in Phoenix selling specialty tubes, a man who talks far more than he should. Mason stayed quiet. Luca began pacing very slowly around the burned-out supercar shell. He crouched down near the back, closely studying the bent subframe. He stood back up, examining the empty engine bay. He rested a hand on the salvaged tubular frame Mason just fixed, tracing the fresh weld with a fingertip. In that second, his face flashed with something caught between deep heartbreak and profound, sudden recognition. "It is real," he finally whispered in English. That sudden language swap was definitely no accident. "I wasn't sure those scrap auction rumors were true. It's real." Luca stood tall. He met Mason's eyes right over the top of the raw chassis. "You know what really happened to this?" "I only know the official story they fed me." Luca nodded slowly. "And now you finally see what actually happened to it. Picture this, 2 men standing quietly in that bright Nevada morning, staring down the ghost of a dream that corporate cowards tried to bury in the scrap heap forever. A heavy truck rumbled past them on the street outside. But inside, under those harsh lights, you and I know that bare metal chassis wasn't a failure. It was a masterpiece, patiently waiting to finally be seen. "I can help," Luca offered. Mason weighed the leap. He had spent 5 weeks toiling solo, stubbornly believing his own faith was enough to rebuild it. But the wrecked car held original systems. Specs lived only in Luca's private files and deep in his memory. Mason had no other way to uncover that hidden potential. "When can you start?" Mason asked. Whispers of the project spread faster than Mason wanted. "You and I know how the rare car world works. Everyone with an eye for value knows everyone else. Gossip about lost masterpieces pulses through that tight circle, just like an electric current through a closed circuit. Not because anyone purposely broadcasted it, but because the perfect conditions existed and the spark naturally found its way." Eric Vaughn heard. He caught wind at a Scottsdale dinner from an elite collector who had heard whispers from a high-end dealer who got his tip from the Phoenix guy. His information was completely vague. Yet for Eric, vague rumors meant a chance to exploit failure. Vague meant he could strike fast and cheap, moving way quicker than solid facts allowed. He arrived at Mason's garage that Saturday morning, strutting like a man who thinks he is doing a doomed fool a massive favor just by gracing him with his presence. He wore a tailored jacket, costing triple Mason's rent, holding an expensive coffee from a fancy shop that didn't even exist in this gritty part of town, meaning he either went out of his way to get it or had someone fetch it. He barely glanced at the wreck, seeing zero of its potential. $200,000, he offered, right now. I can have a check cut today. No, Mason said, you paid $800 for it. I know what I paid. Eric recalibrated fast, acting like a buzzard used to picking off desperate scraps. 400 grand. That's nearly $500,000 more than this. It's not for sale. You and I know that look. Eric stared at him like Mason was an absolute fool, totally blind to the fast cash being offered. You actually know what this is? Yes, Mason said, I do. Then you clearly know what the open market will pay. I know the market price, Mason said, but that's not what my vision relies on. The absolute confusion crossing Eric's face was the expression of a hustler hitting a wall of faith he simply could not comprehend. He lingered a few minutes, pitching variations of the same empty cash offer in different slick wrappers, and finally stormed off in a way that signaled he believed this battle wasn't over. Ava, who hid in the office during that clash, stepped out once Eric's loud engine faded. He wasn't offering real help, she muttered softly. No, Mason replied, he was offering to kill the dream. She eyed the wreck. That is definitely not the same thing. No, he agreed, it isn't. But stick with me here. The woman who showed up 2 weeks later was entirely, wonderfully different. She shared Eric's massive wealth, but that is where the similarities completely stopped. Valentina De Luca was 53, dark-haired, carrying the undeniable, powerful presence of a visionary who survived high-stakes rooms for decades, fully authentic, refusing to fake a single emotion she did not genuinely feel in her soul. She was Europe's most devoted private collector of classic Ferrari supercars, a pure fact proven by historic auction records and global museum loans. She occasionally appeared in magazines that completely missed the real vision, and she had been quietly involved in a role the single father knew about but could not grasp, back when blind corporate politics killed the Nero program. She showed up alone. She drove a very ordinary rental car, parked outside, and stepped right into the garage without giving any warning. She froze upon seeing the ruined supercar. Where others saw failure, she just stared. Luca was busy in the shop that afternoon, quietly handling some paperwork at his bench. The moment he looked up and spotted Valentina, a complicated look washed over his face, an emotion way too deep to sum up in just one word. Valentina, he said. Luca, she said. She barely acknowledged him. Her eyes were locked completely on the scorched supercar chassis. The single dad watched her from the lift. He chose to stay completely silent. You and I know that restoring scrap takes immense faith. He realized this moment was better observed than interrupted. She circled the wreck, studying the salvaged frame from several different angles. She carefully examined the engine bay. She inspected the rough front bodywork. It was just bare metal, but those with faith could finally see the brilliant shape taking form. She lingered at the back for ages, intensely studying the rebuilt tail section. Then she pivoted toward the father. Who did the frame repairs? I did, he said, the welds on the left rear member. I know. The access was limited. I had to modify the jig. She gave him a long look. Most welders would not have known to modify it. Most welders didn't spend 3 years on this chassis. Heavy silence. You know what it is, she said, since the scrap auction, keeping it entirely secret. I needed to understand what I had first. She turned her eyes back to the salvage. When she finally locked eyes with him, the single father recognized her intense look. He had witnessed that exact stunned realization years ago in a Maranello conference room, right when the first unbelievable track performance evaluation results finally came back. Picture this, a room full of seasoned experts going absolutely silent. It was faster than anything we had built, she said. We ran it on the test circuit 3 times before the accident. Each time the numbers were wrong. Wrong how? Wrong meaning they were miraculously better than predicted, which meant the standard models were entirely wrong. Which meant our vision was light years ahead of what the executives could grasp. She hesitated. That endless potential frightened them. The father stayed quiet. The crash was real, she clarified. I want to be absolutely clear there. The driver suffered minor injuries. The prototype supercar was badly damaged. But they didn't kill this legendary program just because of a superficial wreck. The wreck was a convenient excuse. The fearful executives had already decided to abandon the vision beforehand. "I know," he said. "I knew then. I tried to save it." She shared this harsh truth without an ounce of pity. "I lacked the corporate leverage to stop their cowardice. I have obsessed over that lost potential for 7 years." "So have I." The shop fell completely silent. Luca paused his work, staring blankly down at his tools. "What will you actually do with this survivor?" she asked. "Finish it," the father said, and then he admired the restored machine. "You and I know true faith when we see it." He gazed at the rebuilt machine, remembering that first night, realizing the incredible destiny this salvaged supercar demanded. "I am finally going to prove exactly what it can do," he declared. "What it was always supposed to do." That final rebuild took 11 grueling weeks, pouring every spare hour in alongside Luca. He was there 4 days a week, always on call for the other 3. Then came Valentina, sparking an unexpected conversation that caught Mason totally off guard. They talked until 2 in the morning, the very first night she came by. She brought the missing blueprints, original code, and technical drawings. She had hoarded the material specs for 7 years, almost as if she knew. She always believed this burned-out wreck would rise from the ashes one day. "You and I know that real craftsmanship finds a rhythm once you hit that sweet spot. Never rushed but never dragging. Just steady, intentional progress. It happens when true believers clearly see the masterpiece they're restoring." Mason crafted missing body panels entirely by hand from scratch. With 0 references, he trusted the blueprints and the pure logic of the design, following how one steel curve naturally demanded the next. How the aerodynamic vision of the front flowed perfectly through the doors, finally resolving at the tail. He wasn't just copying a dead car. He was fulfilling the ultimate vision its creators intended. Even Ava's vibe in the garage shifted completely from those bleak early weeks of staring at scrap. She quietly transformed from a doubtful bystander into an active believer, maybe not turning wrenches, but absolutely shifting the energy in the room. She fetched tools, steadied parts. She spotted misplaced gear he had lost track of, and she started asking brilliant questions. Questions much sharper than an adult would ask, mainly because they came from a mind completely untainted by what the world considers impossible or foolish. Around week 9, she looked up and asked, "How do you know when it's done?" Mason took that question to heart, treating her curiosity with profound respect. "When the thing you built matches the thing you understood it wanted to be," he said. She weighed that thought. "Cars want things. Things that people build well," he said, "carry the intention of the people who built them. Sometimes the intention doesn't get finished. When you finish it, you can feel the difference." She stayed silent for a second, like when a sentence ends right. He smiled down at her, exactly like that. "Stick with me here." The night that engine finally breathed, there was no fancy ceremony. Just an ordinary Tuesday in October. Luca was standing by. Ava had just walked in from school, taking her usual faithful post right by the workbench. Mason nailed the last wiring that morning, spending hours methodically reviewing a massive pre-start checklist that spanned 4 dense pages written by a guy who deeply understood the stakes involved. Knowing that the thin line between total disaster and glorious victory comes down to perfect preparation. He primed the fuel lines. He triple-checked the entire electrical grid. He locked eyes with Luca, got a nod, and turned the key. It cranked 3 times. Then it roared to life, but it didn't just sound like some old motor turning on. It felt like a pure force that had been waiting inside the building for the perfect moment to break free, a deep, triumphant roar that completely filled the garage like rushing water, finding every dark corner and vibrating against the concrete walls. It wasn't just loud like those flashy, superficial show cars you see. It was pure, raw power. You and I both know that feeling when a broken thing finally reclaims its glorious purpose. Let's look at a miracle. No flashy theater, just pure commitment poured into what others called junk. Mason sat inside the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel. He just stayed silent. The roar ripped through the garage and his very bones. Luca stood near the front, resting one hand on the revived metal, his head bowed in reverence. His daughter Ava stood near the workbench, hands resting at her sides, wearing a look that held the awe of a believer whose faith just paid off. It was the face of someone who trusted a burned-out wreck could live again, and is finally watching that truth confirmed. Mason met her eyes. She gave 2 thumbs up. He gently killed the roaring engine. The whole shop fell silent, holding that heavy, ringing stillness that only follows a profoundly triumphant noise. The sudden quiet felt just as powerful as the roar. "We need to run it longer before any load testing," he stated. His faithful voice never wavered. "Yes," Luca breathed, his voice totally shaking. Mason lingered in that driver's seat a second longer. Then he climbed out, walked over to the back office, and poured 3 coffees. He carried 2 out. Ava took the 3rd cup, a mix of milk and sugar that barely qualified as actual coffee. They stood around drinking, staring at the restored supercar that was, finally, right here. After countless gritty hours, exactly what he knew that charred scrap shell could become. Nobody spoke a single word because the roaring truth had already been fully delivered. The elite Monaco invite arrived exactly the way Valentina promised. Delivered by powerful people Mason never reached out to, and frankly had no idea how to contact. Talk of a resurrected classic Ferrari wasn't just a rumor. It was hard truth, backed by the heavy credibility of Luca Moretti and Valentina. De Luca's name pushed the story through the classic car scene, like a tidal wave of unbelievable, extraordinary news. The gathering was an ultra-private showing tied to the Monaco Classic, held in a gorgeous venue near the water. Flooded with that flawless natural light you only get 100 meters from the Mediterranean Sea. 200 elite guests were invited, controlling between them fortunes so massive they completely defied any sort of normal human logic or daily struggle. Mason actually drove the Ferrari there himself. You and I both know that's unthinkable for a masterpiece. But when a single father pours his life into a hopeless wreck, he doesn't hand the keys to strangers without a brilliant reason, and he saw absolutely none. Ava rode beside him in the passenger seat for the final stunning stretch. A practical choice for travel, but the shared emotional victory mattered far more. When the black supercar rolled into that gallery, the whole room reacted the way people do when confronted by an impossible triumph they cannot handle. Everyone froze, wealthy chatter died instantly. Critics who were busy admiring pristine, safe investments turned and stared, drifting toward the reborn vehicle like moths drawn to a miracle they simply couldn't comprehend. Mason calmly parked the beast and stepped out, standing by his creation in plain clothes, quietly waiting for the wealthy skeptics. He excelled at this. He knew how to wait without ever looking anxious. Eric Vaughn showed up in 4 minutes. This wasn't the arrogant Vaughn who once saw scrap and assumed his cheap offer was a blessing to a broke father. This was Vaughn deeply rattled by his own blindness, sweating through his usual smooth composure. "Stick with me here." Vaughn dropped a 7-digit opening offer right on the spot. "I told the vultures I wasn't ready to discuss terms. Eric insisted the rich folks in this room would bid higher. I told him I clearly understood." Eric bragged he possessed the elite network necessary to handle a massive automotive transaction this complex. I thanked him. Eric then promised the final offers might hit $1.5 million. I promised I would be in touch. You and I know I would never call him back, but playing this polite game was useful. Valentina found me later that night, lingering at the gallery edge. I was just watching the crowd admire my reborn supercar. She stood right beside me. 47 wealthy buyers have begged me for an introduction. She sighed. I reminded every single one that I have absolutely zero part in this sale. That is the absolute truth, I replied. I know. Silence. But if I were brokering this miracle, she whispered, the final price would easily crush anything these suits offered tonight. I know, I said. She paused for a long second. Will you actually sell it? I just stared at the vehicle. The crowd couldn't look away, constantly circling the shiny hood and snapping photos. They stared at my masterpiece the exact way people gaze at gorgeous treasures they fully know they can never afford, yet they still cannot conquer their greedy desire to stare. Someday, I told her, but not tonight, she nodded slowly. Then what is tonight for? I let that sink in deeply. Tonight is about seeing it and truly understanding the brutal cost. I added, and letting these strangers stare blindly, completely unaware of the ashes underneath. She weighed my words, then she smiled. You built something truly remarkable. We built it once, I firmly replied. I finished it alone. She stayed totally silent for a second. That is definitely not a minor detail. That glamorous Monaco gallery showing happened on a typical Tuesday. By the very next Friday morning, I drove my restored Ferrari up to a stunning cliffside highway above Monaco. Valentina had quietly arranged permits to lock it down for us, never once demanding a single favor back. That empty pavement hugged the steep cliff edge for 3 kilometers, with the sea crashing below. The sharp dawn sunlight hit the perfect angle, making everything, the entire road surface, the rugged stone guardrails, and the rich ocean water, look incredibly fresh and newly painted. I had brought my daughter Ava. She rode shotgun beside me, wearing a thin jacket that offered zero warmth against the crisp morning air. But she stubbornly refused to grab a heavier coat, gripping the cold window frame with both hands, while staring intensely at the twisting mountain road ahead. "You ready for this?" I asked. She glanced over. She wasn't scared. Ava was never afraid of the insane machines I proudly built. "Yes," she smiled, so I drove. Stick with me here, ordinary words just fail. That is exactly why mechanics use the cold, hard language of physics to explain a resurrected machine's true power. Savage acceleration figures, extreme lateral loads, and intense aerodynamic downforce. Those exact metrics exist for my Ferrari Nero, and they are absolutely extraordinary. But cold numbers simply cannot capture the visceral reality of what it actually does. It instantly turns pure human thought into aggressive motion with a savage directness that removes absolutely every barrier between my beating heart and the engine's response. It never magically auto-corrects mistakes. It refuses to safely compensate. It strictly executes whatever it is asked to do, with a raw completeness built by visionaries who grasped their dream at a spiritual level, leaving absolutely zero room for failure or cheap compromise. I rocketed to the very end of the cliffside pass, slowed down, spun the tires, and cruised back. When I killed the engine, Ava sat totally speechless. Faith always beats failure, right? Then she said, "It's like it knows what you mean." Mason saw potential in the road ahead. The harsh sun cut the dashboard at that same angle. The vast sea rolled quietly below. "Yeah," he murmured, "that's exactly right." Heading back to the hotel, Ava asked, "Are you happy?" He considered her question the way he weighed everything that mattered, slowly, looking beneath the surface. "I think I am," he told her. "I think this is what real happiness actually feels like." She just nodded. She had collected these truths for years, guarding them with that fierce, quiet faith she brought everywhere. "Good," she replied. "You and I know true transformation rarely strikes like lightning in a single dramatic flash. Instead, it builds through quiet, hidden shifts that finally forge a completely different life." Then came the Ferrari Nero sale, handled through Valentina's elite network, just 6 weeks after the Monaco trip. A Milan museum finally acquired it. They had chased this salvaged masterpiece with the deep patience of true believers. It yielded a massive payout that Mason's mind frankly struggled to process as real for a while. He knew exactly where that miracle money belonged, straight into the medical fund for Ava's surgery. Her operation was scheduled for the following spring. He cleared out those heavy, lingering debts that had quietly haunted the dark edges of their lives. He even bought a new hydraulic lift part he had patiently waited an entire year to afford. Then came a stunning phone call he never ever expected to receive. It was a Milan law firm, representing the official corporate archives over at Ferrari. Sparked by the museum purchase, they had dug deep to review the hidden history of the old, discarded engineering program. From the ashes, they unearthed original documents for the forgotten Nero project, including some lost personnel records. Records proving who really built that resurrected machine. The official letter was stiff and precise. It admitted to serious historical mistakes in the project's original shutdown paperwork. Because of this newly surfaced proof, they had launched a full internal investigation. And it enclosed a separate page with corrected personnel credits, finally carved into the official Ferrari archive. Mason sat alone at the kitchen table, reading the truth while Ava was away at school. The official document broke down the Nero program's engineering credits, fully corrected at long last. It named Luca Moretti as the senior materials engineer. It named 4 familiar guys from the scrap days, and right at the very top, where he had always secretly belonged, though they once erased him, Chief Engineer Ferrari Nero Project, Mason Reed. He quietly folded the letter. He carefully placed it in the drawer with his other hard-won treasures, right next to Ava's critical medical paperwork and resting just above the gritty lease for his scrap garage. He brewed some fresh coffee. He went straight to work. That evening, Ava burst through the door with a new assignment on the vast history of engineering. She had to pick a central topic, and entirely on her own she chose a salvaged car. She wanted to interview her own dad. She sat directly across from him at the kitchen table, composition notebook wide open, tightly gripping a pencil. You and I know that fierce, focused look of someone digging for the hidden truth. What is engineering? She started. Mason paused to think about it. Understanding what a broken thing truly wants to be, he said, and having the faith to build it. She noted it down. What's the hardest part? Patience, he answered. Here's the secret we all need. Spotting the difference between broken and unfinished. She recorded the lesson, then glanced up at her father. Are they really different? Worlds apart, he replied. You abandon ruined things, but unfinished things just need a little faith. She jotted that down as well. She stared at the page for a second, then back at him. Just like the Ferrari, she said. Exactly like that car, he agreed. She shut her notebook. The kitchen fell into a hopeful, peaceful silence. A calm that had grown familiar ever since they took a chance on that scrap project. The garage gave them back their lost spark, undoing years of heavy, crushing doubt. The light above the table glowed warm. Outside the glass, the Nevada evening faded slowly into a deep, peaceful dusk. Ava set her pencil aside, watching her father with that familiar, intense focus she had carried since she was just a baby. A look that proved she had studied the situation, and finally grasped the hidden truth. I really think, she murmured, you are the most patient man alive. Mason just looked at his daughter. He recalled 7 long years of holding on to a vision nobody else could understand. He pictured that charred supercar shell sitting on the scrap lot. He remembered that roaring engine coming alive one crisp October night, a beautiful noise shaking the garage walls, proving the doubters completely wrong. Believing in the work taught me, he finally said. The effort reveals the prize. She nodded, totally satisfied. She grabbed her pencil, flipped to a clean page, and wrote 3 words at the top. You and I know exactly what they were, things worth finishing.